They built a bridge on my land without asking. Just showed up one day, started pouring concrete like they owned the place. I told them to stop. I sent letters. I even got a lawyer involved. Didn't matter. They acted like I was the one being difficult, like I was just some grumpy neighbor getting in the way of progress. So I let them keep going. I let them build their fancy little shortcut, watched them lay it down piece by piece, like they were proud of what they were doing. And then, when they were finally ready to show it off, to test how strong it was, I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The ground did all the talking for me. The whole thing came down. Not fast, not loud, just enough to make their faces drop and their voices go quiet. They thought I'd lost. They thought I'd given up. But they were wrong. I just waited. Watched. And when the time came, I made sure they felt it. All of it. I've lived on that land for years. Long enough to know the seasons by how the trees change color, long enough that the quiet there started to feel like part of who I am. It's not some giant property or anything fancy, but it's mine. I know every inch of it. I fixed the fence myself, cleared out brush after storms, and sat out on the porch more nights than I can count, just listening to the wind. The neighborhood isn't bad either. It's quiet mostly. People keep to themselves, wave when they pass by, but don't bother you too much. I liked that. I didn't move there to make small talk. I moved there for space, for peace. The HOA was always there, floating in the background, sending their little newsletters, reminding people about grass height and mailbox paint colors. I didn't pay them much attention. Annoying? Sure, but not worth getting worked up over. I figured as long as I stayed out of their way, they'd stay out of mine. We had an unspoken deal, until one day, they broke it. And once they did, everything started to change. It started with a letter in the mailbox, just one of those regular HOA notices, the kind I usually toss without reading. But this one had bold text at the top. Something about community improvement plans and enhancing access between neighborhoods. At first, I didn't think much of it. They were always trying to sound important, and half the time it meant painting curbs or planting flowers by the entrance. Nothing to do with me. A few days later, there was a little meeting at the clubhouse. I didn't go, but someone left a flyer taped to my door. Same wording, same buzzwords about connectivity and shared benefit. That's when I noticed something strange. On the bottom of the page, barely noticeable, was a blurry little map. I looked closer. That planned access point they were so proud of, it ran right across my property. I figured it had to be a mistake. Maybe they drew the map wrong. No way they'd actually build something on land that wasn't theirs. So I sent an email asking for details. No response. I called. Voicemail. Weeks passed and nothing came back. That's when the trucks showed up. Quiet at first, then louder. The kind of noise that doesn't go away, and that's when I knew this wasn't a mistake. They were serious, and they weren't asking. Once I realized what they were doing, I didn't stay quiet. I showed up at the next HOA meeting, not because I wanted to argue, but because I thought maybe they just didn't realize the land was mine. I brought a copy of my property line, highlighted, clear as day. I laid it on the table and said, "This section here? That's mine. You can't build anything on it without my permission." They nodded like they were listening, but I could tell they weren't really hearing me. One of them said something about how the greater good sometimes requires compromise. Another one smiled and said it was just a small strip, and that I'd hardly notice it once it's done. I asked for that in writing. They said they'd get back to me. They never did. I followed up with emails, called, sent a certified letter. I even spoke with a lawyer just to make sure I wasn't missing anything. He looked at my paperwork and said, "You're in the right. They can't do that." So I started keeping a file. Photos, emails, dates, copies of everything they sent me or didn't send me. I wasn't looking for a fight, but I wasn't going to let them walk all over me either. If they wanted to cross the line, I was going to make sure they knew exactly where it was. Then, without warning, the noise started. Early in the morning, before I even had coffee. Big trucks, concrete mixers, guys in safety vests walking across my land like they owned it. I walked out there, calm but angry, and asked what they were doing. One of them just said, "We're following the plan." I asked who approved it. He shrugged and said, "Talk to the HOA," so I did. Again. I sent another email. Then another. No reply. I called twice, left voicemails both times. Nothing. A week later, there were metal posts in the ground. Wooden framing went up right through the edge of my yard. I looked into permits. Nothing had been filed through the city that allowed them to use my land. I printed out the law, highlighted the parts they were breaking, and mailed it straight to their office. Still, no answer. I even sent a formal notice warning them they were trespassing. I had a lawyer help me write it, to make sure it couldn't be ignored. But they ignored it anyway. At this point, it was clear. They weren't confused. They weren't making a mistake. They just didn't care. That's when I really started digging into property law. Not out of curiosity, but because I knew I'd need every detail. Every inch of boundary lines, every rule about easements, every little rule they skipped to rush this thing forward. I read things twice, took notes, asked questions. If they thought I was just going to stand there and let them finish this bridge, they were wrong. I was quiet, but I wasn't done. After weeks of getting nowhere, I sat down with my lawyer again, this time with everything I had. Photos, letters, even videos of the construction on my land. He looked through it all carefully, and then he pointed something out that changed everything. They're building over your property, but the foundation on your side? That's what holds up the entire thing. Without it, it won't last. That's when it hit me. They weren't just trespassing. They were depending on me. They needed my land to keep their little shortcut standing, and they hadn't even bothered to ask for it properly. No permits, no agreements, nothing. They thought if they moved fast enough, I'd just give in. So I started looking at this a little differently. I went through easement laws line by line, talked to a city planner, found out exactly how much weight they were allowed to place near property lines, how deep their supports had to go, and what they couldn't do without signed approval. Turns out they needed a signed document from me that they never had, which meant, legally, their entire project was hanging by a thread. I didn't rush. I didn't raise my voice. I just kept collecting, kept learning. And as I did, I saw exactly how I could shut this down without ever touching a tool. They thought I was just a stubborn landowner in the way. They didn't know I was already building my side of the plan, quietly, carefully, and with every piece of paper they forgot to file. It wasn't just about the bridge anymore. One morning, I found a notice taped to my front door. The HOA claimed I was interfering with community development and creating a hostile environment. That part stung. I'd lived there for years, never caused trouble, always minded my own business. Now they were painting me as the problem, just because I didn't roll over. Soon after, a couple neighbors stopped waving. One asked if I really needed to hold up the whole neighborhood over a patch of dirt. That's when I knew the HOA was spreading their version of the story, making it sound like I was the one being selfish. Like I just didn't want to share. I stood on my porch that evening, watching their crew work under the setting sun, and I felt this mix of frustration and clarity. I had tried everything, talking, writing, even legal steps. I gave them chances to fix it, to do the right thing. They ignored all of it. So I decided I was done waiting. They wanted to test how far they could push me. I was about to show them where the line really was. Before I did anything, I sent one last letter. Simple, direct, and sent through my lawyer so there'd be no excuses. It clearly said they were building on land they didn't own, and if they didn't remove their structure within 10 days, I'd take legal action. No threats, just facts. I didn't expect a response, and I didn't get one. So when the deadline passed, I made my move. I filed the paperwork with the city. Since they never had legal permission to build on my land, I was within my rights to revoke any kind of implied access. That meant pulling support for the section of the bridge that rested on my side, literally. I didn't grab a shovel or tear anything down with my own hands. I didn't have to. I hired a contractor who specialized in boundary work. All we did was remove about 2 feet of compacted soil that had been supporting one of their beams. That's it. We didn't even touch their materials, just reclaimed the part of the land they had no right to use. I took pictures the whole time. Every step was legal, documented, and quiet. They had a big test planned that week, some sort of safety check for the bridge. A bunch of HOA board members showed up with clipboards and safety vests, trying to look official. I stayed inside, just watched from the window. Then, as they began testing weight on the far side, the shift started. It wasn't a big crash or anything dramatic, but the bridge flexed, cracked slightly near the edge, and tilted just enough that you could hear the panic in their voices. They rushed to stop everything, called in engineers, and within a day, the project was shut down for safety concerns. They never blamed me out loud. They couldn't. But they knew. That bridge fell apart because it was built on something that didn't belong to them. And when I took it back, their whole plan collapsed with it. The morning of the test, the air felt weird, heavy, like the weather knew something was coming. I stood behind my window with a cup of coffee, watching them set up. There were clipboards, hard hats, and a lot of pretending like they had everything under control. A few of them even laughed, probably thinking this was the final step before the HOA patted themselves on the back. They started walking across the bridge one by one. Nothing dramatic at first. Then one of the beams made a sound. Not loud, but enough to turn a few heads. Someone pointed. Another person pulled out their phone, probably to take a video. Then it shifted. Just a little, but enough that one of the guys lost his balance and had to grab the railing. That's when the panic kicked in. The whole far side of the bridge dropped by maybe a foot, slow but clear. You could see their faces change. One woman shouted something about structural failure, and suddenly everyone was off the bridge as fast as they could move. No one got hurt. It didn't fall into pieces or explode in some crazy movie scene. But it cracked, leaned hard to one side, and from that moment it was done. Useless, unsafe, embarrassing. I just stood there, watching. I didn't smile big. Just a quiet kind of smirk. The kind that says, "I told you so," without saying anything at all. After the bridge collapsed, things got real quiet on their end. No more trucks, no more workers, no more smug emails. Just silence. I knew they'd try to spin it somehow, maybe blame soil issues or unexpected shifts in weight. But they never said a word about me. They couldn't. Every step I took was legal, and every move I made was backed by documents, photos, and laws they ignored. They tried to salvage the project at first, brought in a few inspectors, probably hoping for some fix. But after a couple of visits and a lot of head shaking from the experts, they gave up. The bridge was done for. It was unsafe, it was illegal, and rebuilding would have meant starting from scratch. With permission they knew they'd never get from me. A few weeks later, I noticed a shift in how neighbors looked at me. Some, who'd kept their distance before, started nodding again. One even said, "You were right to stand your ground." I didn't need them to say much. I wasn't looking for praise, but it felt good to know people saw the truth. The HOA never apologized, of course, but their tone changed. No more threats, no more fake smiles, just quiet emails when they had to send something, careful wording, and a lot more respect for boundaries, literally and otherwise. And me? I finally got my peace back. No more construction noise, no more trespassing. Just my land, my rules, and the bridge that never should have been there in the first place. Gone. Looking back, I didn't win because I shouted the loudest or made a scene. I won because I paid attention, stayed calm, and learned the rules better than they did. They thought they could walk all over me because I seemed quiet. What they didn't get was that quiet doesn't mean weak. It means focused. I didn't mess with their bridge. I didn't sabotage a thing. I just took back what was mine and let their own shortcuts catch up with them. Honestly, I didn't even need to lift a hammer. All I had to do was step aside and let gravity and the law do the rest. So if there's a takeaway here, it's this. Stand your ground, but do it smart. Know your rights. Document everything. And when people try to push you around, don't get loud. Get ready. They built a bridge without permission. I just let gravity finish the job.